The dusty Nintendo 64 that Pete gave me was one of the only good things about my sophomore year at ASU. During a time in my life where game development homework was nearly as oppressive as the heat hot enough to distort the air itself, it was my anchor back to a simpler time. The summers I spent with Pete and a can of Pringles playing a copy of Ocarina of Time that Dad never returned to Blockbuster, the fields of Hyrule were our escape then. Pete's beat-up console came with one yellow controller, the kind of third-party controller you get at a friend's house when he takes the good one, but I didn't mind. I had a portal back to my youth, my old escape from reality. The 64 came with a decrepit copy of Super Smash Bros. Thin spider webs laced the cartridge slot, and the word Super was nearly unreadable on the peeling label. The game was fun at first, but not the sort of game that one plays alone for an extended amount of time without being reminded of their lack of friends. And that was a reminder I did not need. So it didn't take long until I grew bored of falcon punching computer players. But I needed the release, the escape of a new game. So that weekend I drove through Metro Phoenix looking for any garage sales, hoping to find a hidden treasure from some soccer mom too out of touch to realize what she was giving away. After an afternoon of searching, I ended up with some copies of Nintendo's most promising long-lasting franchises, F-Zero, Star Fox, and GoldenEye. I was a lucky man, made only more fortunate by the 2 first-party controllers I found for $1 each. I was on my way home to play my instant classic titles when one last house grabbed my attention. There were no cars and only one scarcely filled table, and an old man drinking from an A-Team commemorative mug. His outward appearance was unsettling, to say the least. He stood a full head taller than me, or at least he would have if it weren't for his hunched back. But the back was hard to pay attention to, with the crooked smile that he gave me as I passed by. Several teeth were missing, but the remaining ones were stark white as though made of porcelain. I was heavily considering passing him altogether when one additional detail caught my attention. His eyes were glazed over in gray. Blind. In other words, a perfect candidate to throw things of value away without realizing it. I swerved my Honda Accord to the side of the street and practically jumped out of my car to make it there on time. Immediately upon seeing the old man without the shield of my car, something came over me. Something insidious. A cold pit that seemed to squirm within me, squelching and pleading to dash the other way. But the sweet promise of another cartridge was too much for me to take. His smile widened as I approached. "You're not from around here, are you?" I swallowed hard and laughed nervously. I actually am. I'm a game dev student at the college." The man chuckled and stepped past the table, pointing directly at my shirt. "Roll Tide, right?" I flickered my eyes to my shirt. It had been worn down over my decade of fandom, but my Alabama football shirt was still clearly legible. "Oh, right, I trailed off as the man reached over to the table, grabbing a cane and starting to use it to feel his way back to his original position. Something twisted inside of me. "Are you blind?" The man let out a high-pitched but good-natured squeal of a laugh. "Is that how you open all of your conversations?" I looked down, heat rushing to my face. "Sorry, blind as a bat." The man waved a hand in front of his eyes, his grin only getting wider. "Then how did you see my shirt what are you on the hunt for today?" The man's voice suddenly became more formal, as if the time for pleasantries had long passed and business hour was overdue. I scratched the back of my neck, still put off by the interaction. "Just some old 64 games." "64 games?" I rubbed the bridge of my nose, taking a breath. "Sorry, Nintendo 64. "Nintendo?" I began formulating ways to politely excuse myself from this man, who clearly didn't know what a video game even was, when the man whistled low between his teeth and leaned against the table, looking directly at me. "Whew. Son, I'm gonna be honest with you. I have no idea what the hell a 64 is. But I've got some old games from Ben. Maybe one of those will suit you." "Who's Ben?" The man waved a dismissive hand. "I'll be back in a jiffy." He stumbled his way into the garage, leaving his cane behind. When he was gone, I looked across the table to see what he was selling. There were the usual knickknacks that looked as though someone emptied their junk drawer onto a table, but what stuck out most to me were the paintings that lined most of the area. Each was a Rorschach test, an inkblot drawing used by bad psychiatrists to tell you what kind of pill you should be taking. They made a variety of shapes as I looked across them. A lake, a rope, a stone, and something. As I came to the last one, it looked almost exactly like Majora's Mask from Zelda, the heart-shaped body with little protruding spikes decorating its sides. I had been hoping to find that game on my hunt, so this felt like a cruel divine prank, showing me what I wanted most but keeping it out of my reach. Or maybe it was just some Freudian nonsense causing me to project my desires onto an ink blot. I drifted my vision back up and swore as I jumped back. The old man was an arm's distance away from me, smiling with his mouth but not his eyes. He said nothing, holding out a Nintendo 64 cartridge. It was the charcoal color it was supposed to be, but someone had written Majora on the back in black Sharpie. My chest fluttered as I snatched the copy. "You've got Zelda?" "Who?" "Zelda, this is the Legend of Zelda, no?" The man gave me a confused look. "This says Majora." I sighed. This man is going to be the death of me. "Right, but that's never mind. How much for it?" The old man smiled wider, stepping closer to me. "There was a kid that used to live here, about your age. It was his. If you want it, it's yours." There was something off in his tone, as if trying to clue me in on some secret I wasn't privy to. But I couldn't pay too much attention. Not only did I find my game, but I found it for free. My inner skeptic noticed the shady cartridge and thought about the chance that it simply wouldn't work. But it wasn't like I was going to lose money on it. Pirated or no, I was sure to be in for a good time. "Thank you so much," I said, immediately turning on my heels to leave. I power walked to the car, unable to shake the feeling of eyes on my back. As I climbed into the car, the old man called out, "Goodbye, Ben." At least, that's what it sounded like at first. My mind must have been playing tricks on me, though. Surely he said goodbye then. I didn't pay too much attention to it, though. I was too caught up in my fantasies of returning to Hyrule. When I made it to my apartment, I shoved through the cluttered kitchen, ignoring the past due rent letters, medical bills from my recent appendicitis, and my mountain of coursework I had to do. Life had a way of stacking up while you tried to avoid it, but with my new copy of Majora's Mask, there was no way it was going to catch up to me. No matter what difficulties awaited me in Hyrule, I swore to myself that I would not back away from the TV screen until the game was completed. Nothing could force me to go back to the real world. As I plopped in the understuffed beanbag chair in front of my shoddy CRT television, the Nintendo 64 seemed to call to me, or perhaps whisper to me to get away. It was a strange sense of apprehensive longing that both pushed me and pulled me away from my console, but nothing could force me to go back to the real world. I plugged in my new controller, set the other games aside, and grabbed Majora's Mask. I gave it the old blow really hard into the slot trick to clean up the dust, and after a short battle to fit it into the old console, the game clicked on. I was treated to the main menu of Majora's Mask, an ominous shot of the titular heart-shaped mask followed by an upbeat rendition of the Clocktown theme. It was light, plucky, and had been burned into my memory over the last decade of nights in Hyrule. Part of me wanted to listen to the sweet melody slowly become more sinister as time went on, representative of the tonal whiplash within the game. But the bigger part of me wanted to open the game and jump in immediately. My urge to play the game was only enhanced by the impeccable quality of the game itself. The frame rate was smooth, the audio crisp, and the visuals somehow seemed sharper and more saturated than any other game I'd played on this television, even more recent consoles. The entire game sang of life. But when I pushed past the main menu onto the loading screen, I was given a reminder that this was a used cartridge. Having someone else's save file always felt like an invasion of their privacy, a way to psychically intrude on hours of their life, an invasion of their spirit even. And this game was no exception. There was one save file. His name was Ben. The file had nearly every mask in the game, most of the bosses, many of the temples, and he was on the final day of the game, hardly an hour before the cataclysmic moon crash the game was infamous for. Maybe 75% of the way through with the game, if my memory served. It was a shame he had come so close to beating the game, but for whatever reason not be able to finish it. But Ben wasn't my problem. Consumed by a wave of enthusiasm, I hastily typed the name Link into a new save file. My childhood awaited. For being such a shady game cartridge, the game ran remarkably well, almost indistinguishable from a retail copy. I went through the beginning of the game by sheer muscle memory, blitzing through the Lost Woods, getting transformed into a Deku Shrub, and eventually I got to the place of the game where I was set to meet the Happy Mask salesman. I had the dialogue memorized by this point. The bastard would jump up behind me and hit me with his signature, "You've met with a terrible fate, haven't you?" That didn't happen. Instead, when the mask salesman was supposed to appear, the game froze, emanating a high-pitched buzzing sound that lasted several seconds. It was some sort of melody, but the shock of the sound made it nearly impossible to make out in such a short time. And then, as quickly as it came, it was gone. The Happy Mask salesman was there. His unsettling ear-to-ear smile belied his pained, hunched form. A distorted voice-acted line of dialogue shot through the TV's speakers at full volume. The voice was high-pitched, distorted, and sounded as though it were being strangled. "You've met with a terrible fate, haven't you, Ben?" I swore, jumping back, and dropped my controller, immediately reaching for the clunky remote. I mashed the volume down button, but it didn't indicate being anywhere near the levels I just heard from the game. What the hell was that? By the time I calmed my pulse and looked back at the game, the cutscene had passed and I was in Clocktown, the starting hub of the game. The same plucky music from the title screen played, and for the moment, I was back home. I made my way through the early parts of the game on autopilot, generally forgetting about my encounter with the Happy Mask Salesman.